Okay, hello, welcome again, everybody, to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every episode I talk to writers from around the literary spectrum about their work, the art and function of writing, the publishing industry, i.e., how they do what they do. For the most part, most of my folks are mystery and crime fiction writers. I'm thrilled today to be joined by one of the very best out there, Jim Latwell. How are you doing today, Jim?
Good. Thanks for having me, Beth. It's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. Jim's been on the show a few different times, and that's because he's a prolific writer and has a new book every year, like we all are supposed to be doing. Jim actually does it. We're going to talk about his new book, Dead Drop. Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. This show is both a YouTube show and a podcast. So it would be thrilling to me if you would go ahead and subscribe for both. Maybe leave me a nice review, especially if it's on the podcast, if you're on Apple iTunes or Amazon or any one of the main podcatchers. Good reviews help more people find the show. So I would greatly appreciate that. And if you don't want to do that, at least maybe be kind and tell a friend, because this is a great way to learn something about writing in the writing industry, the publishing industry, and it is an industry. It is a business. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So without further commercial from me, Jim, let's get into it. As I noted, you have a new book coming out, Dead Drop. For those, and I just got my copy this morning because it releases today. We were recording this on Tuesday, July 19th. I had a pre-order. I just got it today. So I often have had a chance to read the book. I haven't had a chance to read more than a page or two this morning, but I've read enough of your work that I'm already super thrilled about it. So again, into my commercial, tell the audience all about the new book.
Well, thank you. Yeah, today's release day. It's one of those things you kind of build up for, and then it's here, and it's like you want to take just a moment and kind of deep breathe, and then the work continues, because now you've got to get out there and push this thing that you've just got out there in the world. But Dead Drop is a first book in a new series, and it's set in the desert Southwest near Phoenix. The main character is a detective in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. His name is Nathan Parker. Now Nathan is dealing with the things you'd find in Arizona. And immigration issues are one of the things that are on the forefront down there.
Sure.
What's coloring a little bit of Nathan's interactions is his partner was killed, murdered by a coyote bringing over migrants over the border. So he's not a hardliner. He doesn't realize, he realizes that it wasn't the immigrants that were coming over. It wasn't their fault. They didn't kill him. It was the coyote that was hired by the criminal organizations to bring the people over that was responsible for his partner's death. But that's kind of his backstory is a little bit, and he's caught up in that. He's dealing with survivor's guilt, basically, that, what could he have done different, a couple of years ago when his partner was killed during that stop. But what he's found now is he's on the trail of a series of migrant deaths, undocumented migrant deaths in the Phoenix area that are just dropped in the desert. No really attempt to hide them very much. And what he soon finds out is there's a link between those deaths and the death of his partner. So his trail is trying to connect those dots, and it actually lures him over the border. And he gets in all kinds of trouble down there, and actually needs help from the very same people he was once pursuing to get him back over the border safely.
Well, I'm excited to really finally be able to get started in this. Like I said, I've read enough of your work. I'm really excited about that. I want to talk about Nathan Parker because you've given us a picture of him. I think it's pretty good. But how is he different from some of your other lead characters? I think of Detective John Penley, some of the others that you've had. As you build characters, I know you don't want to just repeat the same type of thing over and over and over. So how did you think about crafting this character to make him a unique, compelling new character for your new series?
Yeah, well, I hope he comes across that way, because I do pay attention to character. I really think that's important when you're writing, anything, um, because people will forgive a lot in poorly plotted books and movies if they can invest in the character. They're willing to forgive anything. If you can think of movies that kind of give uh, that kind of impression, if you look at Taxi Driver with De Niro's character, that character was so vivid and so bright. People recognize that now when you talk about Taxi Driver, but they probably can't even tell you what the plot of that movie was about.
Right.
You know, but so I spend a lot of time with my characters before I really start to write. Um, I have gone as far as writing a short story in first person POV to kind of get in the head of that character and how they would think, how they would act, and how they would speak, so that I have a feeling of who they are before I really start to write the narrative in the book. Now, with Nathan Parker, I knew that his overriding backstory was going to be driven by his partner's death, and how that has affected him since then. He's lost relationships because of it. He's thrown himself into the job to avoid dealing with it. So he's really struggling with that survivor's guilt, and how that's colored his decision making moving forward. And as the series goes forward, you see that kind of play out, and on how that's affected him.
You know, I'm curious too. You say like you've written you might write a short story with a character. Are you already working on? And I know with the book just coming out today, you're in the middle of all of the promotion and all that kind of thing. But so many writers, because the process between typing the end and submitting on deadline and the point where the book actually comes out is a really long one. For anyone who
Yeah.
doesn't know that, it's a really long one. Have you already started on the next story for him, or are you crafting that in your head? Where are you at with the next Nathan?
Yeah, I mean that's a big point, and people who are just kind of getting into the business of writing don't realize how much lead time there is in the industry. I mean, I'm trying to think when I wrote Dead Drop was probably 2 years ago. It's been with my publisher for about a year, and now here we are released. I've already completed a third draft of the sequel that's coming out next July. So that's not due to my publisher until December, I think. So I've got some time to kind of tweak with that. But yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's kind of helpful when you do a series like this. You've got familiar characters, and some of those return in the second and subsequent books. So you've got a little bit of a Bible that you're keeping on, characteristics, and how they act, what their biases are, and that kind of thing. So it does help you when you go into craft that second or third book.
What is that time frame when you're waiting like? Is it a and I'm curious because in the modern age, most of the writers I know, myself included, when you finish draft, whatever draft number where you feel okay, most of us work with editors of some kind, um, and then you go to your publisher, they have their own views on what that should look like.
Right.
From the time you submit it to now, did you do a lot of additional editing? I mean, how much did they ask you for and changes from when you gave them the submission that they had originally asked you to submit?
I'm trying to think back on Dead Drop. There weren't significant changes. I mean, the publisher that I'm with now, Level Best Books, for this series, I love working with them. They're very hands-on with the authors, and it goes through, I think, three different editing passes. And the first is really getting in the weeds, and are all the connections and plot points making sense? Is a reveal happening at the right place in the book? Does a character make sense, or does something need fleshed out? We really didn't have too much to go back and fix on Dead Drop, so it was a pretty smooth process. But I think before the editor even got it, I probably had maybe 10 revisions before I went to that, before I was ready to, get turned loose.
Right. I was going to ask you about this later, but maybe I'll do it now because I think one of the real struggles that a lot of people have is self-editing, and because they fall in love with passages or little story threads, or maybe even just some phraseology or a sentence or two, and they just cannot make themselves get rid of it if it doesn't work. And how has that been for you? We call it killing our darlings for a reason, right? Because you love that stuff. But you know, have you ever gone through that? And if you did, how did you handle getting to the point where you could self-edit even stuff you really loved because you had to acknowledge it wasn't working?
Yeah, that's something I think you learn over time. I think the first time I came up with that against that, it was like you really kind of wanted to take it personally. You worked hard for this passage or this scene, and the editor wanted to just get rid of it. I recognize now that that's not a bad thing. If it's not resonating with them as a reader coming in cold with looking at your manuscript, the readers out there are probably going to have the same reaction to it. I think the most visible example I had was with a book, Bury the Past.
Mhm.
And I see this with a lot of people who write police procedurals or military technical thrillers. They do a lot of research, they've got a lot of knowledge, and they try to fold that into the book. Um, and that's great, but it doesn't move the plot forward. I mean, it's good information to have, but do you really need to know what kind of lock is in a door or what kind of caliber a weapon is? The guy's going to die. Okay, that's what you need to know.
Right.
But yeah, so if it doesn't move the plot forward, you gotta get rid of it. I recently taught a session at Craft Fest, Thriller Fest this year with Neil Nyron, an editor, a former acquisitions editor from Putnam, and we were doing first page critiques, and we were looking at first pages of mostly published work, and you could kind of tell from the first pages, okay, this one's getting a little overwritten in sections, and the prose is getting a little purple. Just get to it. Get to the story.
Mhm.
So it's the same thing with killing your darlings. Kill them.
Yeah.
Just get rid of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you have to become something of a serial killer, and which
Yep.
is my cheesy lead into a question I've wanted to ask you, because I know for a while you were writing a book on serial killers, and I just was curious, what's the status of that book?
That's been kind of on the back burner while I'm dealing with dead drop and you know those other issues and some other assignments that I'm working on. But it's still smoldering around out there. Um, you know, I think we've talked, Sacramento's got this connection with serial killers that nobody can explain. Like 15% of the nation's serial killers
Yeah.
have some tie to the Sacramento region. It's
Yeah.
just bizarre.
Yeah.
But
But are we
yeah,
ever going to see it? I mean, are you going to prioritize it again at any point, or is it one of those projects that'll probably, you know,
it's I don't want to say I'm not going to do it. It's I've got a folder right there. I'm looking at it, so it's there. Um, but yeah, it's where that fits in the priority and where my passion is at the time. And I want to get the right angle to it. Uh, Another serial killer profiling thing that kind of re-victimizes the families and survivors isn't what I'm about.
yeah.
So it's how you approach that. And I've got a couple of family members of survivors of serial killers who are starting to talk about how it affected them. And if I do it, it's probably going to be from that angle.
That's really interesting. I one of my many side projects. I'm a project director for the Open California's oral history program, which is funded through the
Right.
California State Library. And we just recently did one that I'm trying also desperately to get finished right now with uh, some pictures and such for Don Novi, who was the head of the California Correctional Peace Officers
Right.
Association for quite a long time, and a guard, and father was a guard. I'm sure you know Don.
Yeah.
But we talked at length. I didn't actually do that interview, but he and I have talked at length a few different times about being involved in with victims' families, and it is a sensitive area. And you can never probably do enough to make um, to ever make up for what they've gone through. But I hadn't thought about it because I knew you were writing this book on serial killers, and of course I didn't know what the angle perspective on it was. But I hadn't thought about how even the writing about that could be something that could be really a sensitive area for them. And I mean, of all the things that we have to think about when we write, um, I guess the shortest version here. Anytime you're going to write anything with true crime, it adds a wrinkle that you don't have with fiction.
It does.
So I imagine that is that's a very different approach to something than what you do when you're writing fiction.
Yeah, it is. And it's something that I've read some true crime that it's like, oh, this is kind of sensitive here. They're just kind of blowing over the impact that this crime really had on all the survivors left behind. And that kind of bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of the victims issues, through my career in the prison system and probation and parole. And they do kind of get forgotten about in a lot of the policy issues that come out of the Capitol and that kind of thing. And I think Don Novi and CCPOA and those folks did a tremendous job getting a victim advocate kind of focused in a lot of their work. And that I think we needed that, especially at the time when policy decisions were just being made to let folks out of prison just because.
Well, and somebody listening to this might wonder, well, what does this have to do with writing? I think it has a lot to do with writing, and I will tell you why. I have talked with authors who are former Navy SEALs or other special ops people, uh, police officers, first responders of other kinds. And I think when you write stories, fiction, or if you're going to do something, narrative nonfiction or true crime of some kind, I think it's one of those things that a lot of those writers will tell me that they feel often gets ignored, which is the cost of the action that you're writing about. So many times, especially in military things, a protagonist can just seem like Superman and, offs all the bad guys and then walks away and goes, has dinner, right? That is not how it is. And, as I've told you before, my brother was a cop. I think I have a little small insight into this. You don't have these kinds of interactions in your world and not have them affect you, no matter how well trained you are, prepared you are, or experienced you are. And I always think writers do themselves a disservice when they don't take into account little things. If a gun goes off next to your head and you're not wearing headphones, you can't hear a damn thing for hours, right?
Right.
And they never talk about stuff like that. They never talk about you see stories, somebody takes a bullet and then the next scene they're fighting off a mountain lion or something. It's like, are you serious with me right now? That is not how a bullet wound works, man. Come on.
Right.
So
Right.
writers, please think about the reality of these things as you write them. You noted, and we've talked about this a lot. You spent a lot of your life in prison, on the right side of the bars. I want to make sure I point out as a as a guard and a negotiator and a warden. Yeah. So that's my cheesy little intro here. Staying on that theme though, because we see so many stories across all media about prison life, and books and movies and songs, and now there's even podcasts, if you want to know what's going on in prison. Are any of those even remotely accurate from your perspective in how they portray prison life?
In terms of the television shows and movies in particular, no. Orange is the New Black completely, missed the target. Even Reacher, as much as I love, the Reacher television show that was on, the series that was on, and Lee Child's series, I loved it. There's one scene in Reacher where this big buff guy is standing down this prison guard and saying, "No, you're not gonna give me an unclothed body search," and he goes on to cite some Supreme Court case. That's not how it works. It, no,
I've seen that.
if
Yeah.
some if some guy's going to refuse to do that, then he's not going to refuse. And if we need 5 people to hold him down and do the unclothed body search, that's going to happen. And actually, a Supreme Court decision says just the opposite. That we have the ultimate right to make sure that there's no contraband introduced in the prison.
Do you have a favorite prison movie, book, song, or story?
Yeah, Jack Abbott's Belly of the Beast was a book. He's an ex-con and wrote, about his prison experience, but he kind of fictionalized it a little bit. And he talked about, when you walk into a prison, you can feel it. He called it atmospheric pressure.
Uh-huh.
And you can, as a career corrections guy, you can walk into a housing unit and you can feel what's going to happen. You can feel the tension, noise level, or the lack of it. And what's going on there. And you can kind of get a sense of where the compass is for how the day is going to go when you just walk into the unit. That was a good book. And I think the movie that probably captured it most accurately was American Me. And that was Edward James Olmos. And it was kind of featuring the Mexican mafia. And it kind of captured those relationships and the extortion and pressure that unaffiliated inmates can face when they come into the prison system.
Yeah. This is one of the many reasons I have dedicated my life to not ending up in jail.
Good decision.
I know you and I have talked about this before, but again, for folks who have not been party to those conversations, I wanted to ask you again about acquiring your agent, because you had a really neat story for how you made that connection and turn it into an actual agent-writer relationship. So if you don't mind, Can you share that with me again?
Yeah, my agent is Liz Cracked out of Kimberly Cameron and Associates in the Bay Area. And there's a mystery writers book conference at Book Passage. It's in Marin County. And they do a great craft-oriented mystery writers conference. And I attended a couple of those, and there was a panel on the agent and author relationship. And it was an interesting panel, and I hadn't known a lot about what agents do and how they represent their clients and that kind of thing. So I kind of like what Liz had to say and how she interacted with her clients. And so basically, I stalked her around the book room after her panel. Don't let anybody tell you that stalking is a bad thing all the time.
At least
at least in this context. And we were at a book table, and I guess she had nowhere else to go because she couldn't get past me, I guess. But she asked what I was working on, and I kind of had an elevator pitch, in my back pocket. Here's what I'm working on, and I gave her the pitch to At What Cost. And she liked it. She said, "Okay, send it to me." So I after the conference I did, and we went back and forth for a couple of months, and we signed a rep agreement, and she got the book out there, and we got a 2-book deal on that one. Off we go.
See, I'm sure you make that sound very simple, and I mean, and maybe it was. I just know so many writers, and so many newbie writers in particular. They have the belief that getting an agent is the key that will unlock the golden door. And
yes and no. It's getting the right agent for you and your material. And I think the industry is changing a little bit. There are more and more publishers out there that are accepting unrepped writers.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to find an agent and have an assortment to look at, Thriller Fest I think still has the best. They call it a pitch fest, and you can sign up for Pitch Fest at Thriller Fest, and you basically go in there and have a couple of minutes to go around the room and pitch your book to the big agents, out of New York and other places. I was able to help a little bit with that this last year, and I know of 4 or 5 that came away with 5 or 6, send me your manuscript and that kind of thing, and several of them ended up with representation out of it. So it does work.
Yeah, and I think, as you noted, the industry's evolved a lot. There's a lot more smaller presses that will work with writers that don't have an agent. I don't know. I've certainly talked with a lot of authors who, in those situations, who feel good about them and don't feel, like they've been shortchanged anyway. But at the same time, the industry can be very complicated. Contracts can be very complicated.
Yep.
Foreign rights. I mean, there's an awful lot still to know. And I've actually talked with lots of authors who've had their work optioned for movies. And, very few of them ever actually get made. But, a friend and fellow author of mine, Jeff Pearlman, now his book on the 1980s Lakers has been turned into the HBO series Winning Time, right? So, I mean, it can happen, things that you don't, and that book was like 5 books ago for him, right? So things can happen. I think if you're in a position where an agent wants to rep you, it still seems to be the best way to go, as long as you have a good one and with a good reputation. Did you know much about Liz before you talked?
I knew more about the agency and what Kimberly Cameron had done with the agency and her direction and that kind of thing. And I like the approach that she takes with authors, and that kind of filters down to Liz. So yeah, I did a little bit of homework, so I knew what that was before I walked into it.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of conferences, we're back to doing conferences live again, and I haven't done one now live in a while. But for this year, I would have. There's a couple of just the timing wasn't right. But I know we're both big fans of conferences, and you've mentioned a few reasons. The chance to interact with other writers, number one, but also agents, editors, publishers. What advice do you have for writers who are slowly crawling out of their COVID caves now, thinking about attending their first conference, and are weighing all the different possibilities? What would you say to somebody who comes and says, "Jim, I'm thinking about doing this. What do I need to know?"
Yeah, I think it depends what you expect to get out of the conference, because I think each one kind of specializes on a different thing. If you've never been to a conference before, I think something good to start with is like a smaller regional kind of a book conference. We have Left Coast Crime out here on the left coast that is a smaller, very friendly, very collegial kind of atmosphere, and it's really bringing writers together and just kind of celebrating what has happened in the last year since we've seen each other. There aren't a lot of publishers there, but they do usually have agents that come to Left Coast Crime, and so you can make some connections there. But what I found is there's a lot of sharing that goes on in the community about what's working marketing wise, what's not, where have they found obstacles, or who's accepting submissions, for short stories if you're looking for something like that, and you kind of get those connections going. So it really helps to stay connected, and there are writers groups and associations that kind of help glue that together. Mystery Writers of America, International Thriller Writers, and Sisters in Crime, are three big examples, where you go to those conferences and you'll have breakouts for those groups. So like Sisters in Crime at VoucherCon always sponsors a breakfast and membership meeting and that kind of thing. So you connect with other chapters, other chapter members. And it's nice to know you're not alone out there, because you're going to hear that you're the same issues, same problems you're having, other writers are having. Everybody goes through that imposter syndrome, halfway through the book. This is the one that they're going to realize that I'm a total fake and fraud, and will never sell a copy. Everybody goes through that.
Yeah.
So it's nice to know that and feel that. And I always come back energized from the conferences. Just hearing all the stories and getting myself recentered again on that stuff. If you're a debut author, I think ITW and Thriller Fest does a tremendous debut program all year long. They'll promote the debut authors, and they do a big blowout breakfast for the debut authors, and really showcase their work breaking into the scene.
Yeah, I think the collegiality and the feeling of optimism that you take out of a conference. That's the thing I've always remembered from the conferences I've been to. You walk out feeling like, like you said, this is such a lonely pursuit, because, for all the other stuff, whether it's going to conferences or doing anything else, you ultimately will only be successful if you plant your butt in your chair and write words and then throw that garbage away and edit it and move on and on. Right. It's a long, hard slog of a process. And not, not to make it sound awful, I'm just saying we know that it is. So it's nice to have those moments where you connect with others. And yes, you find out, oh, hey, everyone's having the same struggles I am. And I think imposter syndrome is one of the biggest when you do any of this for a living. I've had stories that later on went on and won like magazine awards and things like that, of course, because I'm a reporter by trade. But I remember when I was writing, it's like, no one's going to even read this crap. I'm a blah, blah, blah. So I absolutely can understand that. I wanted to ask you this in conjunction with one of my earlier questions, but I hope it isn't too out of context, but have you ever found yourself stuck on a story that you can't quite get right, but you also just can't let go? This has been in line with the whole killing your darling things, but have you ever just been so committed to a story that maybe you just worked on it for years and you just can't let it go?
Not so much committed and can't let go. I've written 20-30,000 words of something that I realized, there's really not much of a story here. So it was kind of helpful to get that out and just clear my head and move on to something else. But none of it goes to waste. I mean, I put all that stuff in a file, and there'll be a character, a dialogue, or a scene that I'll pluck out of that and put it in something new. But it's kind of related to writer's block. I don't see writer's block as a block. When I'm having an issue and I can't write a scene, or character's not working, to me that tells me I'm not looking at it the right way. Either that's the wrong character, the point of view is wrong, or I'm not thinking about that scene the right way. I used to be a very linear writer, where I had to write the beginning of the story to the end of the story. But what I've found helps me when I come up with something like that, and I have that issue that I just can't get past, I'll skip it, go right the end of the book. You know how you want the story to end.
Right.
And by writing that last third or last couple of chapters, it could unlock something that fixes what you're working on now. So it's like, oh, that's what I need to reveal here. That's the clue that needs to be planted. Otherwise, it makes no sense. So there's ways to get around it.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. It's a little bit like how movies are shot. Movies are shot, scenes are shot, the ending is often shot first. And, it all depends on availability of a location and of a certain cinematographer or whatever the case may be. And then when you get all those things filmed, you sit down and you actually edit everything together and make it
together. Right. Right.
Exactly. I think it would benefit a lot of writers to think that way. I think that's a great idea. It's like, well, the location for shooting this scene is not available in my head today, so I'm going to move over here and I'm going to shoot this scene that is available. Right. So
right. I like it that way.
Yeah,
that's good.
So what is the craziest thing you've ever done to market a book? And I mean that besides coming on this show.
Oh, wow. I think the most off the board kind of thing we did one time was at Halloween, when kids were coming around for candy. Kids got candy, adults got bookmarks. So
I love it.
I think that's probably one of the most out of the box ones. Everything else has been pretty standard stuff.
Well, I asked because I mentioned Jeff Pearlman earlier, who's a great guy, and he's clever. He will go to Dodger Stadium. He'll take one of his books. He'll sign a copy and he'll put it under a seat. And then he'll go on Twitter later and say, if you sit seat number this, my book's underneath it. Or he'll go when he's in an airport, he'll go into an airport bookstore and look around when no one's looking, and he'll put one of his books on the shelf and he'll sign it. And, he does, and, just a variety of things like that, which, and Jeff's one of the greatest book promoters ever. I mean,
that's good.
He does not
I'd
have
be
no in his vocabulary when it comes to.
yeah, I'd be afraid to put something under a seat that I'd come back later and three of my other books would be back under the seat too with it. So
Hey, good trade, man. Uh,
yeah.
so only a couple more here, but who are you reading right now? And is there a writer that you think maybe people are sleeping on and should check out if they haven't done so already?
Yeah, I'm reading a couple of different things right now. Speaking of movies and Netflix and all that kind of stuff, Gray Man with Mark Graney just turned into a Netflix movie. I think it comes out this week or next, but he just did an LA premiere. Met him at Thriller Fest this last year. Great guy. But yeah, he's got plenty of press. Somebody who I think slips under the radar for a lot of folks is Jennifer Hillier. Jennifer is just a tremendous domestic suspense thriller writer. She's got a book that's coming out today, as a matter of fact, as well. Things They Do in the Dark.
Okay.
It's really, really good. So folks, she's got a great following, but in my mind, she's one of the upper echelon thriller writers out there right now.
Outstanding. Well, I always like to end on a question that I intend to be fun, and I hope it's fun, maybe a little challenging, but just give our audience a little more insight into the mind of Jim Latoile.
Oh, God.
I can put you together with one of the following three people. Well, in this case, more than three, but one of the following three for dinner, conversation, whatever you want. You choose who you want, and the options I'm going to give you. And so tell me who and why. The options would be Ted Bundy, Wyatt Earp, and all three of the original Charlie's Angels.
That would be difficult. I'd have to say, let's go talk to Ted.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think there's some stories there that really haven't been told yet. I think he could have told us a lot more than we know about serial killers and what they do and how they do it.
Well, it would certainly be nice to have the insight if you could use it to stop them from doing what they do, right?
Yep. Yeah, there's a whole fascination with serial killers, and we see it. I know I saw it in the prison system. Women would come in and try to visit and write, and just were enamored by these guys. And there's actually a psychological diagnosis of histobristophilia, where you're attracted to these guys. And I mean, Manson had wedding proposals. Richard Ramirez got married, on death row in San Quentin. So it's like, it's out there, and it's a strange phenomenon to watch, but it's weird, really weird.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, and we've talked about this before, so I won't belabor too much right now. But I think law enforcement and corrections are one of those careers where if you try to tell the stories, so many of the stories that you could tell how they actually happened, people would not believe them because they're so crazy. People are so capable of things that are just, it's almost unimaginable for, I will say, normal people to grasp that some human being could do XYZ thing. And the example I always use was the guy who wrote The Wire. Yeah, telling the story of the person that Omar Little's character was based on, and in The Wire, Omar jumps out of a fourth-story parking garage and survives. And someone asked him about it, a reporter asked him about it, if that really happened. And he said, well, it did, but it didn't happen in the way that they portrayed it. And he said, oh yeah, sure, I'm sure he didn't. He goes, yeah, because the guy actually jumped from the 6th floor. But I thought nobody will believe it.
Believe that
he actually survived jumping out of the 6th floor of a parking garage, and he did. So anyway,
yeah, no, it helps. I mean, having that background definitely helps. I mean, working in the prison side of it, you have a different relationship with these characters. You're basically living with them, you know, 8 hours a day, but you're living with them for years. So you do get to know them and see their quirks and how they really tick and what they think. You know, Angelo Bono, the Hillside Strangler, was, you know, on my tier for years, and he was an interesting character, but a very different persona than the Hillside Strangler when he was out in Los Angeles. So
Yeah.
it's helped me create characters a little differently, especially the more criminal characters that I have in the books. I use a lot of that background.
Well, I, imagine uh, as two-dimensional as their actions seem, nobody in real life is two-dimensional. We're all three-dimensional, very three-dimensional. And so I'm sure that it has been helpful in, crafting really menacing bad guys. That's
Yeah.
the job, right? So, well, Jim, thanks again. As always, it's it's an open invitation to come on the open mic anytime you have a new book or another story in an anthology. It's always so much fun talking about writing, talking about characters and plot and the business. And one thing I hope most people glean from either from this show or if they go to conferences or listen in on these conversations, writers, with some exceptions, tend to be incredibly generous with their time and their expertise with others. And it is a lonely profession, so maybe that's part of it. And but I've ran into very, very few writers who are not open and generous with their time, and you're one of the best. So I always appreciate it.
Thank you.
So
No, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you.
absolutely. Well, before I sign off, I'll hit you with one more commercial here. Please, if you haven't done so, hit subscribe. And if you get an opportunity to leave a review, I'd really appreciate that too. Help more people find the show so they can glean great insights from people like Jim. If you haven't done so already, it's debut day. Go get a copy of Dead Drop. I'm sure you're going to love it. And if not, there it is. Check out the other books in Jim's canon. He's got some really great stuff out there. Black Label and the John Penley series, the anthology Shattered Glass, so many others where you have work in. Check them out. I know you will not be disappointed. And one final thing, just remember, tomorrow is not promised to any of us, so please make today count. Until next time, I am Rich Eisen, and this has been The Open Mic.